Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Byline with Ben Dennis. To make sense of the headlines without spin, there's a lot to digest over the last couple of days, and unfortunately has been a couple of tragic events that have happened just over the weekend, last several days, not even a full calendar week, including what's happening in Australia at the start of Hannukah. Out of Hollywood, with famed director Rob Reiner and his wife, reports that they were killed, found dead in their home in a quiet neighborhood in Los Angeles. A person in custody in Rhode Island released after this tragic university shooting at Brown. And they're still apparently looking for a suspect here. Not to forget, troops were killed in the Middle East and Syria, plus an American citizen. More troops were even hurt. It's a lot to dive into, but a little glimmer of hope, some good news. How about the condition of Andrew Wolf, that National Guard member who was shot in the head in Washington, D.C. a day before Thanksgiving? Got an update on that. You don't want to miss it. There's also a new report out that I found interesting. It was a survey, rather, where it talks about some holiday shopping trends for 2025 and even mentions politics. Are Republicans buying for Democrats? Are Democrats buying gifts for Republicans? Why does that question even matter to folks who were taking the survey? I asked someone who wrote up a report who dove into the details to see why it matters, but also extrapolating some more data of how people may be shopping, utilizing artificial intelligence. Are older folks increasingly using it? Are younger folks increasingly using it? Or the flip side? It's an interesting conversation I had with a fellow journalist. His name is Michael Giusti. He is a journalism professor at Loyola University of New Orleans. He's also an insurance analyst and a business reporter. We get into the details ahead of the final haul. You may be putting together your final list for the holiday shopping season. Mom, I apologize. I have not bought a single thing. And I'll apologize to anybody else who's on my list, including the dogs. I have to get that done. So with that, let's dive into my conversation with Michael, and then we'll get to the headlines with the questions that still need answered, making sense of them without spin. Let's go. And joining me now is Michael Giusti. Michael Giusti is the chair of the journalism department at Loyola University, New Orleans. He's also a business journalist and insurance analyst, and also the author of a new report based off of a survey involving 1,000 people over the phone, online, about holiday shopping and porch pirates. Michael, I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining Byline.
Thanks for having me.
So just before we get into some of these results, if you can quickly explain for some of our listeners here how the survey was crafted and ultimately some of the formats that were used to answer and who this ultimately went to.
Yeah, so it went to a cross-section of people across the United States. If you look at the raw data, you can see they're geographically spread all throughout the country and Northeast, the West, the South. About 1,000 people conducted by phone and by internet. Yeah, the respondents spanned age from baby boomers to Gen Z.
You know, you being a fellow journalism junkie, I'm sure you love data and the details that are in said data. So once you got this survey, what were some of the biggest takeaways before I ask you some of the line items here?
Yeah, so the biggest takeaway is how prevalent porch piracy really is. More than 1 in 4 people getting stuff stolen from their homes before it's ever delivered is definitely not a number that anyone's going to be really excited to see. There's also some fun, quirky stuff that the researchers asked about. They were asking about K-pop and ChatGPT, but really the heart and soul of what we're doing is who's getting stuff stolen before it gets delivered.
Well, speaking of K-pop, I'm sure plenty of kids are asking Santa for something related to those demon hunters. I had looked at some of the survey respondents. Unsurprisingly, most that participated online were a younger audience, younger consumers, but also folks who are utilizing AI too. Was there anything that stuck out to you on the AI question itself, and maybe who was using AI to purchase holiday gifts?
Yeah, so the top line number is 18% said that they're going to use ChatGPT or some similar AI tool to assist with their holiday shopping. Once you open up the numbers and look at it, the baby boomers, it was down in the single digits, whereas the younger cohort, that 18 to 24 range, it was a much higher number. And that makes some sense. You're going to get a few boomers who are tech savvy, but really the people who are going to be the first to jump into these emerging technologies do tend to be the younger consumers. And it's both hey, ChatGPT, what should I get dad for Christmas? But also, they have some great tools that are being integrated into these models that'll actually do some of the shopping for you and tell you when things are going to go on sale. And there are even some of the agents that'll actually pull the trigger and make the purchase for you. So it's getting more sophisticated every year.
And back to that figure you talked about, 18% say they're using ChatGPT or another similar AI tool. As you just mentioned too, it is getting more sophisticated. So one can only expect and predict that more people, maybe even older folks too, will be using AI as it's developed and as it's ultimately improving. Let me also ask a little bit about this. Did the survey find anything related to maybe some of the gift ideas that AI was suggesting?
You know, I didn't have access to any of that granular level of data, but I think that for the most part, it's going to be based on trends, right? It's going to be based on averages. It's not going to know that dad is a bass fishing junkie unless you tell him. But I think the more you feed into the models, the more relevant those results are going to come back.
Sure. And as we know, AI models based on whatever data that it can scrape online.
Yeah.
And maybe who knows? Time will tell if it starts scrubbing social media accounts too. Just finding photos of people and seeing what they might be interested in. A lot of privacy concerns about that. A lot of questions for lawmakers too. I'm sure you're equally curious about. Looking ahead, back to the first thing you had mentioned, and one of the key elements of this report and part of the survey was about porch pirates. Do you think that AI possibly eventually would help prevent some of this from happening?
So there was actually as I was doing the research, some of the shippers, right? So like I can't remember if it was FedEx. I think it was FedEx, but one of the shippers was using AI to actually analyze where these thefts are happening to try to flag what are the more at-risk neighborhoods, right? And so they're actually scrubbing the data of where these packages are coming up stolen, so that they could work with law enforcement and actually find trends that. To actually prevent this in the first place. So yeah, I do think that they're using it kind of on that end. I think that you're also going to see law enforcement use AI increasingly to try to look for these trends. Looking at the big data and getting some signal out of the noise really is the holy grail of that AI application.
Some data that I found interesting, and I saw it pop up in October, and that was from the National Retail Federation. As you know, they put out this report every single year, holiday spending outlook. Every year, it seems like it goes up and up. It seems like the shopping season starts earlier and earlier. I thought it was interesting in the survey that you wrote about, had talked about people are somewhat skeptical or maybe changing some of their shopping habits as a result of inflation, as a result of higher costs imposed from specific tariffs, depending on where they're coming from or where they're going to. But I thought that was juxtaposed with what the National Retail Federation had said is folks are going to be spending more than ever. And we're going to be reaching, I think it was the $1 trillion mark. Folks spending close to $1,000 for all of their, whether it's shopping, travel, which can be a high ticket item, food, you name it. Is it possibly people are just changing the way that they're shopping, or maybe they're still buying gifts for their relatives, but the dollar figure's coming down? Did the survey find anything here?
So the specific question we asked was, are you scaling back on your holiday gift giving this season? And we did find 60% of people said that they're planning to scale back. Tellingly, that doesn't say spend less, right? And so scaling back could be giving to fewer people, it could be giving fewer gifts. But if prices are up, just because you're being a little bit more frugal doesn't mean that you're spending less, right? So I think there's room for both numbers to be true. And I think that also what people say to a survey doesn't necessarily always match with what they do at the register. So it could be more of a consumer sentiment result. I feel like I should be scaling back, even though, the push comes to shove, I'm going to get that extra doll. But yeah, so 60% did tell us they were planning to scale back, but I think that there's also still room for that National Retail Federation that's going to be looking at how much is actually getting in the register. And I think that both can be true at the same time.
A little bit of a detox report. I'm sure, people might say that they'll scale back, but when push comes to shove, who knows if they actually will do that.
Right.
I was somewhat surprised to see that some of these questions were related to politics. If people would be buying for someone who was registered to a different party. And it stuck out to me, this report. Is there any indication why the question was posed about politics and whether people would buy for someone of a different party? Why would that matter?
Yeah, I think that it's just a reflection of our times. We're in a polarizing space, and I think it's interesting to see. If you're looking at holiday trends, is the polarization finding its way into our gift giving ethos? The top line number was 55% said that they were going to give at least one holiday gift for someone whose political views are different than theirs. I think that maybe your pushback makes some sense, that just because they say that they're going to be giving it doesn't mean that they're going to resent it, right? We can there's space uh, to have different viewpoints from our loved ones, but I think that it's just a sign of the polarizing times, that people really are thinking, hey, I'm buying this for Jake. Is Jake aligned with what I think? And yeah, at least one and two say that that's on their mind.
I would be curious if SRS and Church Quotes, who had compiled some of these questions, also considered whether people would maybe spend less on someone who had different party affiliation than otherwise, but that did not appear to be part of the survey
Yeah, we
here.
didn't ask, are you gonna punish the people you disagree with? We were just saying, are you thinking about the political party? So
Right, exactly.
interesting
But
follow-up question there.
yeah, but whether you buy a stocking stuffer for someone you disagree with versus, a nice Louis Vuitton bag for someone that you're probably going to vote alongside. What you being a journalist yourself, what questions would you had hoped were asked in this survey?
So to me, the most interesting piece is, this is a study that we've done over several years. And the most interesting thing to me is watching the number of people who are affected by porch piracy over the time. It does appear that over the last 2 to 5 years, fewer people are being affected by porch piracy. And I don't know if that's maybe because 5 years ago we were mid-pandemic and everyone was shipping everything, and so that might have been a blip in the data. But it also might be a reflection of just techniques getting better and shippers being cognizant of it, and people knowing not to leave their stuff on the front porch after it's been delivered. I think that the trend over time to me is really interesting. I think that sentiment piece, if you look at inflation, you look at job numbers, that can paint one picture of the economy, and then you look at what people say about the economy, and you can see a different picture. And so I think that consumer sentiment compared with hard data is an interesting picture to look at.
You had talked a little bit about scaling back or at least possibly changing some habits based on inflation, the ticket items of some of these gifts, but it also, the survey included questions about gifts that aren't under the tree, other tangible items, concert tickets, event tickets, you name it. Was there any surprising trends that popped up on this front?
I do think that these experiential gifts are becoming more and more popular. The survey showed 36% said that they're buying at least one experiential gift, such as concert tickets or sporting events or travel. And I think that that's interesting. I think that it maybe speaks to the less materialism and more kind of shared experiences. And I think, to me personally, that's a good thing. Let's not focus so much on the shiny new gadget, but instead on the memories we can make. So, from a personal standpoint, I think that's a good trend. But I think that it's interesting because even if we look back to 2013, that number was just 28%. And so we see a substantial jump from 28 to 36 in just a couple of years. And yeah, I think that this trend of giving the experience does seem to have some teeth.
The survey also found that it was higher income folks who were more likely to purchase some of these experiential gifts. Was that also the case back when that question first started being posed, as you had mentioned a couple years
Yeah,
ago?
that's a pretty long-standing trend, and that's just kind of the nature of it. I mean, if you're buying a high-end trip or travel or a concert, some of these, back when I was in college, concerts would be $20. That's just not the
That's
case
certainly
anymore.
changed.
Yeah, certainly you can't find a $20 concert ticket anymore. So I think that the just sticker price is going to price some people out of it. But yeah, I do think that higher end income bracket does tend toward these experiential gifts. But we did see it, across all the income spectrums.
I would be curious too to see if survey respondents acknowledge whether they were cognizant that whoever they were gifting this ticket to would also have to spend some of their own money to get there,
Yeah,
travel, lodging. So,
sure.
hey, here's your flashy high ticket gift, but you're probably on the hook for spending some money as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I know I had asked you the question, were there any questions that you had hoped the survey had asked folks? What were some of the least surprising takeaways you took from this year's data collection compared to years prior?
Yeah, I think just the ubiquity of the package theft. From my role with insurance quotes, really what I look at is the insurance implications of, basically all walks of life. And so with this porch piracy, you got to ask, okay, well, who is on the hook when these packages disappear from the front porch? And the real sad part is it's the homeowner, because once the merchant hands it to the delivery service is responsible for it while it's en route. But once the delivery service successfully puts it on your porch, by the letter of the law, it's been delivered. And so at that point, you've taken ownership of it, whether you signed for it or not. And so, the insurance implications are that if it was a high dollar thing, if it was a diamond ring that disappeared off your front porch, you're going to have to find someone who you can make a claim. And, homeowners and renters insurance do apply in these cases, but you got a high deductible. Right. So I live in South Louisiana where there's hurricanes and I've got a $2,000 deductibles. That better be a really big ring for it to, take over that deductible. Credit cards, they have insurance protection, the purchase protection on high end credit cards, and you can get some recourse from them. But
Gotta
yeah,
be
I think
careful with
I
those
think
interest rates too.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, I think that you definitely need to be thinking, who's on the hook when these things disappear off the front porch. And to me, that's the real interesting piece of it.
And when it comes down to it, it's personal property that's stolen, as you had said, once it's delivered from the merchant to the delivery service to the front step or to your apartment mailroom, that's your personal property. So the follow-up question is, what should you do next? Should you file a police report? And then my follow-up there is, I'm curious if you have found any research to see if police are actually investigating these in a tangible way, or if they're just picking up these police reports and they might actually fall on the back burner of these cases.
Yeah, so back when I was in college, I had my laptop stolen from my university desk. I filed the
Great.
police report, and I was just indignant. And I asked the police, "So, do you think you're going to find him?" And they're just like, "Sweetie,
Oh,
we don't find individual thefts." And so that was kind of heartbreaking in the moment, but reporting it is important, right? So the police aren't going to go out and send Inspector Cloutot to find your individual package, but they
even
are
if he
going.
had a police dog behind him, like I just heard.
Hey, you gotta get your office mate to help you out. She
Indeed.
definitely, she's been on the patrol, keeping UPS out of my house, barking at them every single time they come up, and she's undefeated. They've never come into my house.
Well, you won't have any porch pirates if the packages aren't delivered then.
That's right. But yeah, but to the point of, do you report it? Yeah, you absolutely, even though they're not going to go and look for your individual package, you do absolutely want to report it, because that's where these trends are going to come in. And that's where they're not going to chase the single package. But if, there's a tens of thousands of dollars in one neighborhood getting stolen, they will actually put some SWAT undercover, and they'll put some cameras, and they'll start doing some investigation. So you definitely want to report it to the police. But you also want to report it to the merchant, because even though the merchant's not technically responsible for buying, no, ma'am, not
He has
technically,
something to say.
yeah, so not technically responsible for replacing your package, they often will. And they'll do it out of goodwill. They'll do it out of keeping a customer happy. And so reporting it to the merchant definitely is helpful. It's also important to report it to the shipper, again, so that they can have the data, but also because sometimes they'll give you the proof of delivery and you'll like, oh, wait, that was my neighbor's front door mat. And you realize that it wasn't actually stolen. They just delivered it at a house next door. And so, yeah, you do want to make sure
Which
that
is
you're
best case
reporting it.
scenario.
Yeah, you definitely do want to report it, but it doesn't mean that they're going to send out their crack investigative team to find your stolen DVD player.
Until there are enough cops on the street and are assigned to the porch pirate beat,
Right.
I understand that may be the case. Was there anything else that you want consumers to know right now as a result of these survey results?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely some best practices. You want to make sure, do everything you can to keep the packages off your porch as much as you can. Get signed up for the delivery alerts so that hey, my air fryer is 10 doors down, and now I should go and grab it. But also don't live in fear, because 28% is it's more than 1 in 4, but it's not everybody. And I do think that while we should have some best practices, we shouldn't live in fear that everything is going to be stolen.
Michael Giusti with Loyola University, New Orleans, insurance analyst, business journalist. I appreciate your time and happy holidays, Michael. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Michael. I find that the details are also quite compelling when you dive into data. It may not be the most exciting thing to look at. However, some good insights to be gained from this report out from insurancequotes.com, as well as some insight from the National Retail Federation, too. They always have this annual report where they talk about a holiday shopping outlook. So let's dive into more of the headlines that we're tracking out of Hollywood. Famed director Rob Reiner, who headed Harry Met Sally, All in the Family, started that back in the 70s, and has certainly famed familial connection to the pictures in LA. Apparently stabbed to death by several reports inside of his home in the Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles. This is near Santa Monica, closer toward the coast itself, if you will. It is a quiet area. We're recording this on a Sunday night. I always come to you on a Monday, but the last update from the Los Angeles Police Department was that they didn't have much to share other than go to the coroner's office in order to identify who the people were that were found dead inside of the home that was owned by Rob Reiner. But many outlets are reporting that his spokesperson or someone who was speaking on his behalf in an official capacity confirmed that Rob Reiner had died. He's listed online at the age of 78. His wife also listed in her late 60s as well, reportedly found dead inside of their home. The circumstances we don't yet know for sure. Again, some reports that they suffered some stab wounds. Who knows who may have been behind this? We absolutely cannot speculate this early in the investigation, but this headline is going to dominate any topical news organization, from the entertainment industry to regular networks. This guy had a famed career. When Harry Met Sally, Princess Bride, family favorite of my own. This guy had a massively successful resume listing, and he was certainly beloved by many people in the entertainment industry. Keep an eye on it. Out of Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, 2 people were killed over the weekend. 9 people, at least 9 people, were hurt after a shooting by what's believed to initially have been a lone gunman. Somebody was put into custody early Sunday morning. The FBI director, Kash Patel, came out and said that somebody was put into custody, a person of interest. They did not say it was a suspect, but a person of interest, after the shots were fired during the final exams at Brown University. Well, this person of interest was found at a hotel roughly 40-minute drive away, 20 plus miles away from campus. After several hours of what we appear to be direct questioning about their possible involvement, this person was let go. The Providence mayor came out and said that this was going to be the case. The attorney general of the state of Rhode Island came out and said that there was actively no basis to continue holding this person. The lingering question here: was there evidence to tie this person to a crime? Were they initially detained in order to explicitly question whether they knew who may have been involved? One law enforcement analyst on NBC News had indicated that this person that they held and they had detained, if you will, was possibly connected to a type of gun fixture, if you will, that was possibly spotted by somebody on campus at the time of the crime. But the manhunt is still underway, and the mayor of Providence, Rhode Island, as of Sunday night, tonight, as we record this, had said they don't know whether the person is still in the immediate area. There's this one video of who police say is a suspect circulating. We know the only description from police in the immediate aftermath was a male who was wearing black clothing. This is quite a concern in that area, but also plenty of questions lingering about how this person could get away with so many cameras, presumably on a college campus and in a populated city such as Providence, Rhode Island. The FBI is all over this. Plenty of questions. Once someone is in custody, charged, there's going to have to be plenty of court proceedings down the line and a trial, but we're not even close to that point. Keep an eye on it. We also don't yet know the identities of the people who have been killed. At least one person still in critical condition. Really tragic stuff. In Australia, just outside of Sydney, at a famous beach tourist attraction, if you will, where a Hannukah celebration was happening, you might have heard the news already. At least 15 people were killed. At least 42 people also hurt after who were believed to be two gunmen, possibly a father and son duo, shot at folks on the very first day of Hanukkah. Many videos circulating on social media, including one where you can just see these shots ringing out from these two paramedics. One person was apparently shot by law enforcement and killed. Another by someone reportedly who was manning a fruit shop nearby who was unarmed and confronted one of these suspects and took the gun from him. This is caught on video. Networks are still working to verify the authenticity of it. However, we don't know a motive behind this. We still don't know the confirmed details of the suspects who were involved. Australia cracked down on gun laws years and years ago, but still, these two people reportedly still legally had access to firearms. Now, the Prime Minister of Australia, who came out and said that this was an anti-Semitic terrorist attack, he apparently wants to crack down even further on gun laws. Horrific tragedy. I mentioned at the top of this, there's just a lot of sad stories to get into. But there were two U.S. troops who were reportedly members of the Iowa National Guard who were killed in Syria over the weekend, as well as an American citizen who was acting as an interpreter. 3 other U.S. troops were also apparently hurt. The allegation here that it was a lone attacker from ISIS who ambushed this entire group. This person was apparently killed by police. President Trump quickly expressed his condolences to all the victims involved and vowed to retaliate strongly. To what extent, we don't know. Put that on your bookmark. How might the United States ultimately respond? Where? To who specifically? What other partners in the region and assets might we utilize? We just don't know. Quick mention of this, but this will possibly give brand new critical details out of Capitol Hill about our ongoing strikes, America's strikes on these alleged drug boats off the coast of Venezuela. There's some reporting that Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth are going to meet with members of the United States Senate this week about the White House and the Pentagon's decision to strike these boats. There's been much scrutiny, plenty of questions from Democrats as well as legal scholars and diplomats and international law enforcement officials who question whether we have any basis, the Americans have any basis to strike these boats without presumably taking someone through a regular court of law, without charging someone with a crime. The still lingering question, why were those 2 apparent survivors of one of these strikes who were taken into American custody released back to their country if the United States didn't believe there was enough evidence to charge them for a crime related to drugs? Again, the impetus, according to the Pentagon and the White House, to strike these boats and conduct these military actions is because of the so-called war on narco-terrorists who are allegedly bringing fentanyl into the United States. Criticism from analysts about the amount of fentanyl, if anything, that's being brought into the U.S. from Venezuela. Rather, they suggest possibly other drugs are coming into the United States, but not fentanyl, which U.S. Senator Mark Warner, he's a Democrat from Virginia, just appeared on a podcast this weekend where, and by the way, he is the former chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. They receive classified briefings relatively all the time, if you will, where they're getting intelligence that is often not reportable to the public. However, he had said on this podcast that he has seen the video of this controversial strike where the initial reporting from the Washington Post had signaled that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth had this kill-all order, if you will, on people who were on this boat. Mark Warner said he has seen this video and says there's roughly 30 to 45 minutes between these strikes, from the initial strike to the second strike, where these apparent survivors were clinging to the boat. He says their clothes were off at that point. Who knows, presumably, if that was in order to create a flotation device or maybe cover some wounds. We don't know. However, he thinks the American public should see this video, and time is going to tell whether it will be released in its entirety. Redacted. Don't know. However, a former Pentagon official who was a legal counsel for top Pentagon officials on whether strikes were legal or not talked to me in a previous interview on this very podcast on Byline, and I highly recommend you listen to it. His name's Todd Huntley. He questioned the legality of these strikes, and he says that there were even times where intelligence came in that he believed was not enough in order to justify a strike based on international law. And last thing this week is a promising update. Andrew Wolf, the member of the West Virginia National Guard who was shot in the head, along with Sarah Beckstrom, who was shot in the head in this apparent ambush-style attack near the White House a day before Thanksgiving. Andrew is apparently out of the hospital and on his way into a rehab facility. The family shared a statement saying that they are feeling extremely grateful for the medical professionals that helped Andrew reach this point in his recovery. Only wish him the absolute best. The West Virginia community surrounding Sarah Beckstrom and her family continues to mourn her loss. Absolutely tragic what had happened. We still don't know the precise motive behind this attack. Someone who was apparently part of a group of Afghan nationals who came over to the United States after the withdrawal from Afghanistan a couple of years ago that was largely scrutinized of how the Americans had handled this and left the state of Afghanistan into the hands of the Taliban. Questions still surround the vetting process for someone who had applied for asylum. There's still a pause. The suspect reportedly had applied for asylum during the Joe Biden administration, which had facilitated the pullout from Afghanistan, but asylum application that was ultimately approved by the Trump administration. So many questions linger about this gentleman, who apparently was from Washington State and drove across the country with a firearm. We'll keep a close eye on that. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Byline. I'll be back again next week. Got a couple of good topics to dive in on. Already some booking in the works right now in terms of AI. You've noticed that I have dived in on AI and the implications with sports, but also how it's impacting kids' lives, shopping, etc. It is certainly taking over, and I'm increasingly interested in how it's going to impact your daily life. Also, be on the lookout for a deep dive on this looming crisis for millions of Americans about their health insurance premiums set to go up in 2026 by hundreds of dollars. There's so much concern about this, context of how we got here, where we go in the days and months ahead before many people, actually weeks ahead, before many folks start to see this reflected in their bills. We'll dive into it. Follow me on Instagram. You know where to find me, Broadcast Ben. Same goes for Twitter. And that's Broadcast Ben _. Same goes for TikTok, Broadcast Ben. Send me a DM. I'm curious about your own questions that I can hopefully answer with some of the experts, the newsmakers and shakers, again, to make sense of the headlines without spin. See you later. Take it easy.